is a fire. I'm going out this way. I don't think I could find my way down those stairs. So thank you for enduring this. My name is Mike Okimoto. I'm the Chief Content Officer for Compare Networks, which is the parent company for Biocompare. I'm one of the co-founders of the company, so I've been with Biocompare since the very beginning. And in a lot of ways, I consider it my baby, in probably in too many ways. What I'm going to be talking to you about today is the 2013 Antibody Survey. The Antibody Survey, for those of you who are not familiar with this, is something that we run every 2 years, and we've done this for, I want to say, at least since 2007, maybe since 2005. My memory doesn't go back quite that far. But it is essentially our opportunity to poll our end users and find out what their feelings are about the market, the current state of the market for antibodies and reagents. So if I could have the next slide, please. So in 2013, we ran the survey in May, spanned about 3 weeks during the month of May. And what we did is we sent an email invitation out to about 38,000 researchers. We got around a little over 1,200 survey participants. The survey participants were incentivized with Amazon gift cards, essentially, which is something that is typical practice for us when we're running surveys. Our goal was to understand in broad terms, more information about the application usage for these researchers, and also a little bit about their purchasing behaviors. And so when I talk about the application usage, what kinds of applications are you using these antibodies for? How often are you using them for? And kind of what are some of the broad research interests that you yourself have? As far as the purchasing behaviors, we were looking for supplier preferences, what kind of buying frequency, and more importantly, I think, what their purchasing forecasts. What do they think they're going to be buying in the years to come? So, and that's all information that I hope I can share with you. So next slide, please. Just in terms of the profile of the respondents, they are what we like to say at the bench. So 34% are postdocs or grad students. 30% are people that are essentially lab technicians. So at least 64% of those people are definitely at the bench. And some percentage of the people of the staff scientists and the PIs are actually also working at the bench. So it's at least 64% of the respondents are actively engaged in research. From the institution standpoint, we definitely skew academic. 83% of those respondents were from academic or government labs. Next slide, please. From a geographic distribution, we skewed very much towards North America, United States and Canada. Almost 70% of our respondents were from North America or Canada. And this is actually a little heavier than than we actually see on the site as a whole. On the site as a whole, we generally see around 40–45% of our audience coming from North America. I was actually discussing this with Hillary Turnbull earlier today and thinking about it, and it probably had a lot to do with the incentive, which was an Amazon.com gift card. So we probably self-selected for North America. 15% did come from Europe. That includes the UK. I apologize for that. I probably should have broken that out. But it's Europe and the UK. And 10% from Asia, primarily China and India. Next slide, please. Of the survey participants, the vast majority of them had purchasing authority. So they can decide what antibodies they wanted to use, and they had the ability to execute a purchase. About 3% of the people had no role in the purchasing process, and they were promptly bounced from the survey. Next slide. And then we asked people to self-select for their areas of research, and probably not surprisingly, the largest section of people chose to selected cell biology. They are cell biologists. But 46% of those people also consider themselves molecular biologists, and on down the line. The interesting part is about 38% of these people are interested in cell signaling, and that comes up a little bit in some future slides. Next slide, please. So this is an example of kind of the information that we were trying to get about the applications that they're using. So not just what the applications are, but how often are you using these applications. So are you using them daily, a few times a week, weekly, etc. And this is 5 of, I think there's between 20 and 25 applications listed total. And actually, if you can go to the next slide, there's an easier way to look at this data, which is like this. I love graphs, I love pictures, because it just makes it easier. I think the interesting thing for me was the fact that this blue line here, which represents Western blotting, is clearly something that people are performing on a much, much more frequent basis than, say, ELISA, fluorescence microscopy, etc., which, they may be doing a few times a month. I think that's an interesting point, because if you are selling antibodies to your audience and you know that these customers are performing Western blot analysis and you're thinking about any kind of re-engagement campaigns, well, you know what? I would start hitting them up probably a little bit more frequently than if you were, if you know that your customers are doing immunofluorescence, for instance. So I think that's the kind of information that you can kind of pull from this data, which I think can be very informative. Okay, next slide, please. We then talked about, we asked our participants about the types of targets that they use. Again, this is 5 of 20 to 20, I think 23 different categories of targets. And what I'm looking at here is, these what these different categories of targets are versus how often these were selected in previous surveys, so 2009, 2011, and 2013. I think it's kind of interesting that cell signal and signal transduction use seems to have increased quite a bit over, since 2009. The others seem to sort of roughly stay stable. CD, cell surface markers, apoptosis, tumor suppressor markers. Intracellular signaling, it might have decreased a little bit, but I think this was, in this group cohort was the largest increase. Again, this is 5 of, I believe, 23 total groups that we had. If you go to the next slide, please. And then when we talk about, okay, not just what types of antibodies are you using, but who are you buying these antibodies from? What are the top 3 companies that you think of when you consider buying a cell signaling antibody? Well, this is what we saw. Not surprisingly, cell signaling technology was actually came out #1 with AdCam and Santa Cruz coming up behind them. And again, this is, we have this data here for 23 different categories. Next slide. So one of the questions that we asked that we were interested in is, what are the greatest improvements that can be made to commercially available antibodies? And this was an open text field, so people could just write in whatever they wanted. And what we did is we took that information and we created what's called a word cloud. So the size of the word in this particular graphic here indicates the number of times that it was actually that it was used. And probably not surprisingly, you see the biggest word right there in the center is price. So right now it looks like of all the things that researchers would like to see improved, they like to see improvements on price. And unfortunately for manufacturers, I don't think they mean prices going up. I actually think they want them to come down. Specificity was also, obviously a big one. And this one actually was something that I thought was interesting, which is trial, right? Which is kind of goes hand in hand with price, right? And people want to try something before they buy them. But again, that's something that could be useful to marketers and product development. Is this something that we want to do as a company? Do you want to consider investing in trial sizes for your customers? Something to consider. Getting back to the topic of price, if you actually go to the next slide, please. One of the questions that was asked was, what are the characteristics that are most important when considering purchasing an antibody? And this year, 2013, 75% of the people said price. When you chart that back over the past 4 years, I guess, no, 6 years, 2009, no, 4 years, clearly math is not my strong point. You see a pretty dramatic increase in the number of people that are concerned about price since 2009. You know, going from, you know, 46% in 2009 down to 38%, all of a sudden 75% of the people, the researchers out there, are concerned about price. So I think if, you know, if there was sort of one underlying thesis to my whole presentation, it's that, yeah, price is actually a big issue to researchers right now. And given the current research budget environment, it's not surprising at all. Next slide, please. So just to finish up, kind of what some of the other things that we covered with in this survey. You know, there's some questions concerning, you know, market penetration. So what companies are you familiar with? What are the top 5 companies that you purchase from? You know, what are some of the things that you, what are some of your perceptions about the products that you've purchased from these companies? So, you know, how do you rate the antibody sensitivity of the antibodies that you purchase from these companies? How do you rate the pricing? Yeah, when we break down the antibodies by those different groups, who do you consider purchasing those antibodies from? Next slide, please. We also wanted to get some information about resources, about how our end users, how these researchers actually perceive and how happy they are with the supplier resources, with the information that they're getting from suppliers. So how do you rate the usefulness of these websites? You know, how do you relate? How do you characterize the content that you're seeing on these supplier websites in relation to how that affects you, and how does that affect your purchasing decision? You know, can you rate the characteristics of the different antibody websites, suppliers' websites, and how that affects your purchasing decision? And that last question, actually, honestly, is a little skewed because this is our audience. So if we don't, you know, people aren't saying Biocompare, something is wrong for us. So just to give you an example of how we're using that data, if you could go to the next slide. We've decided that, you know, gathering a lot of this information was helpful for us. We've realized that there are some things that we need to emphasize for our own website. The concept of producing a lot more original content actually came through with the survey results, and so, you know, we've actually decided ourselves that we're going to do this in 2 different ways. We are focusing now on producing product reviews from our end users. We're engaging with our end user audience and getting them to submit reviews to us because we think that that's actually going to help researchers in the product purchasing decision process. We also realized that it would be nice if there were other ways to try to validate, and I realize that word probably has a couple of different meanings with this audience, but for the researchers to validate their purchasing decisions, another great way to do that would be through citations. And so in July of this year, we actually acquired a company called Scrazzle. Scrazzle, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is a company that has developed an algorithmic technology to go through journal articles and identify products within those articles, which we then take and we tie them to products within the Biocompare directory. So we're now going to be able to identify the number of citations that a particular product has and display that on the site with, you know, after we've done some work on the UI. So we think that that kind of information is actually going to help the end users, because clearly right now they're very concerned about their research budgets and their prices, and they want as much information as they possibly can get before they actually make a purchase. And so with all of this information together, we're trying to provide a resource for those researchers to make educated decisions. And I think that's it. Yeah, thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
That trend in regards to pricing, if you broke it down across the different territories, Asia Pacific, North America and Europe, was it as strong as what you indicated there?
Yeah, so we haven't broken it down that way. My gut feeling right now, just looking at the raw data, and again, I haven't actually trended it out that way, is that yes, it would be, but but point taken, yeah, we haven't actually broken it down. With the survey itself, we actually do provide the raw data, so you'd be able to take it and analyze it in any way that you want. Yeah.
With price being such an issue, do you have an idea how many research projects were stopped due to the fact that the antibody price was too high?
You know, no, and that's something that we didn't ask that specifically. My guess is that you know, I doubt that you would stop an entire project simply because the antibody
Look
price
at the
is too
factor
high.
that the antibody is of the complete project.
Yeah,
It's neglectable.
yeah, yeah.
So price is nice, but not really an issue.
Yeah, until you know, until somebody comes along with the same antibody, you know, an antibody with
That's
the same
competition.
target. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
In your product categories, when you're asking for people what they were interested in, was it just off-the-shelf antibodies, or did you have any kind of space for custom antibodies?
We did. There are some questions about custom antibody production. You know, I'm sorry, I can't remember if we yeah, we did. We did ask for a list of targets from them.
Mm.
Yeah. Yes.
Are you surprised by the fact that more people are using Western blotting technique, given the fact that price is such a concern and Western blots are certainly much cheaper to perform than any other assay?
No, I'm not necessarily surprised. I think also, I mean, I think, you know, the interesting part about that data was just the frequency. But if you really think about the workflow of research, I mean, it's so much easier to, you know, you treat your samples, you collect your protein, you can run Western blots every single day, whereas, you know, immunofluorescence, you need to culture your cells, etc. So, no, I'm not necessarily surprised, but I didn't think it would be, honestly, that dramatic. Yes.
Do you have price on your comparison site?
We do. Well,
remember.
I'm sorry, let me qualify that. If the suppliers provide us with pricing information, we will show that on our site.
Can you
In order-
order them?
You can.
Yeah.
In order
do
for-
people do that a lot?
No. No.
Hmm.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's interesting because when we've looked at these surveys over the years that you guys have done and other people have done, and although the researchers always say price is the most critical thing,
Mm-hmm.
actually when it comes down to it, it's the validation
Yeah.
that they're really interested in.
Yeah.
Now what I'm surprised by the results here is how much the price has increased.
Right.
So it's becoming more of an issue.
Right.
Have you noticed any suppliers who are putting prices down?
We're
Any
taking
vendors?
prices off.
Or taking prices down?
Oh, taking
reducing
prices off. You know what? I haven't done an in-depth look at the pricing pricing across vendors, so I can't say for sure. My gut feeling is that I haven't seen any dramatic,
No.
you know, like changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
Oh,
can't.
I
I can't
feel
say that
the
with
same.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Are there any other questions?
Would you say that the profile of the respondents reflects the overall sort of industry in terms of geographical scope? You said it was weighted towards the US, but clearly more research goes on in the US anyway.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think we actually accidentally sort of self-selected for North America just based on the incentives. Yeah.
And how would you seek to address that next time? Different incentives?
Yeah, exactly.
Amazon's in most countries, right?
Amazon is in those countries, but you know, Amazon.co.uk is different from Amazon.com, so there are different ways to do that. Probably, honestly, it would be something that's much more generic. You know, enter a raffle to win a Ferrari.
To be shipped.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're responsible for the shipping. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much.